thank you everyone who's joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you. So we have Stefan Stern and Geoff McDonald joining us this morning, which is very exciting. We've got two guests. So just to introduce them a bit further, Stefan has been writing about management and leadership for over 20 years. He has been published in the BBC, the Financial Times, where he was the management columnist until 2010, and other publications, as well as being a co-author of Myths and Management. Geoff McDonald was previously global head of HR Unilever and went on to co-found Minds at Work, which is a charity devoted to campaigning for better mental health in the workplace 5 years ago. So Stefan and Geoff, it's great to have you both here. Thank you for joining us this morning and being up very early.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. So today we're talking about remote work realities, and this is obviously something that everyone, the entire nation, and indeed the entire world pretty much is having to deal with at the moment. Previously, businesses have had different approaches to working from home and remote work and flexible working, and now it's kind of been put upon us. And we've been 6 weeks now in lockdown, and businesses are getting more used to the setup, but there are still hindrances. So as we go on to discuss this topic, I encourage anyone listening, if you have any questions for Stefan and Geoff, just stick them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we'll come on to those later on. So just to get going, Stefan, just to pose the first question to you, what have you seen in terms of remote working done well over the last 6 weeks?
Oh, I think where it's going well is where people have actually got time. You know, it was always a bit of a nonsense, this terrible phrase about back-to-back meetings, right? In the analog face-to-face world. I mean, as a journalist, you always hate it when someone tells you, I'm sorry, she's in back-to-back meetings all day, you can't speak. And you just think, well, no, they're not. You know, there must be some downtime, there must be some slack, to use a word, not the software, but the actual word. And I think we found that where things have gone wrong with what we're doing now, Zoom, Teams, Hangouts and so on, is when we've tried to sort of almost recreate immediately that sort of constant flow of meetings and time on demand. And it's too tiring. That's what people have found. It's too demanding. So I think the people have been more thoughtful about it, have built in a bit of downtime. They haven't required people to be staring into a camera all day, every day. They've paced themselves. And they've also shown, I think the best companies will be showing some trust to people, which you alluded to in your opening comments. CEOs, bosses have been quite skeptical about working from home by and large in the past. And that old instinct to have genuine old-fashioned supervisory management, you know, actually seeing the people in the workplace working, you know, that kind of reassures bosses. And I think that what the learning for a lot of leaders has been, you can actually make this work. You can trust people. If you give them space, they will get the work done in their own time, in their own way, but they will get it done in time. And I think that's the other positive to come out of this.
Geoff, if we come over to you on that point, that you can actually trust people, you obviously worked at Unilever for quite a long period of time with Paul Polman, who is a great business disruptor in his own right, and has an amazing attitude towards people, whether that's customers or employees. How did working closely with him kind of impact that aspect of being an employee?
Well, I think as being an employee, you know, the most, I suppose the most exciting part of the Polman era in Unilever over a 10-year period was that as an employee, you felt that you were coming to work for Unilever for a purpose beyond growth and profitability. You know, you felt that you were coming to work for Unilever to improve the health and well-being of 1 billion people in the world through our brands. You were coming to work for Unilever to try and reduce our environmental impact in the world. Around greenhouse gases and water. You came to work for Unilever because you were trying to ensure that all of our raw materials came from sustainable sources into the future and would enhance the livelihoods of millions and millions of people. And so, you know, so as an employee, it was hugely motivating and encouraging to feel that you were working for an organization that was actually living that as well. We began to see how our brands changed, the strategies of our brands, the formulation of our brands, to try and meet some of those big, hairy, audacious goals. And also, you were coming to work for a company that, where Paul had gone to the market in a very courageous way and said, no more guidance. I'm not interested in quarterly reporting. And so therefore you felt that you were doing something that had a bit more of a longer term perspective, and we weren't just running the business on a quarterly basis.
So in terms of keeping employees motivated at this time, you've said that purpose was really what was so exciting about working at Unilever. Do both of you have ideas about how businesses can be motivating their employees at a time when actually feeling unmotivated because you're working from home and you're disconnected to a certain extent from your colleagues, and you might feel isolated? How can business leaders be keeping that motivation and that sense of purpose driving forward?
Yeah, look, I'm just going to touch on I think there's absolutely, if you're working from home, remote working right now, you better get the hygiene factors right. So the business better be providing some kind of technology that is working, that people feel that they can use, so that they can have, their interactions and their connections over a platform that works. It's a little bit like, Dove soap. If it didn't clean you, well, nobody would use it, even although it was trying to make women feel better about themselves. So I think there's the kind of functional piece in getting that right. But I think, as Stefan said, I think there's a huge leadership piece right now, and the way in which leaders are behaving with people that are working from home. And I talk about 4 things that they've got to be doing. Stefan mentioned the one is instilling trust. They've got to be instilling trust in their people, empowering them, flexing the rules, relaxing the rules, changing their expectations that they have on the people that are working for them in remote situations. The second thing is, I think those leaders have got to be instilling some hope for people that are working remotely and are feeling a sense of dislocation and disconnection. I think the third thing is they've got to instill stability. They've got to instill and try and reduce as much uncertainty as they can for people that are working remotely. And then finally, the most important, and Stefan alluded to it, is just to instill compassion. This is a time to show compassion, trust, empowerment, empathy to your employees. And so get the technology working, and then change and lead in a very different kind of way, which instills those 4 things that I spoke about.
Thank you. Stefan, coming on to what Geoff was talking about with trust, and you mentioned it earlier, obviously it features quite a lot in your book, The Myths of Management, where you debunk it. Could you just give us kind of an overview of that as a problem with management and how that is manifesting at the moment, and how leaders can be combating it?
Yes, well, as I say, we used to talk about this old-fashioned thing called supervisory management, and supervision sounds a bit heavy-handed, doesn't it, and almost slightly intimidating. It shouldn't be. It should be a neutral, at worst, a neutral concept. In fact, at its best, supervision means paying attention and caring about people. So I always think management is partly just about paying attention properly to people. And exactly as Geoff just mentioned, now in this context, that's got to be about being open and honest about the situation we find ourselves in, and being realistic about how disruptive this is to everybody, and then starting from there, working from there. The difficulty, of course, for some businesses is if they don't have that purpose already clearly understood, if there was already, cynicism and just a generally bad feeling about the place, then this crisis won't have helped. So in the words of the old joke, you wouldn't want to start from here if that was what was going on in your business. And now in tech, of course, and startups and so on, perhaps people are already more open, more flexible. I'm generalizing here, of course, more used to new ways of working and a less sort of rigid and less hierarchical approach, because it's all about the technical capabilities and the high productivity that you're going for. And so maybe tech starts with a certain advantage, as long as you're not slave to the tech. As Geoff said, it's got to work. It's got to, when you plug it in, switch it on, everyone's got to be able to see and hear each other. But that's just the entry. That's just the ground level thing. The rest of it is how you actually treat each other. And
Mhm.
whether you're face to face, on a phone, whichever medium you're behaving, you've got to show up properly and show that essential respect for each other that is the foundation for everything.
And I think one thing that's been interesting over this series actually is how small businesses are reacting in comparison to big businesses. And there's obviously lots of similarities in terms of leadership, but often tech is, yeah, like you say, you need to get that baseline right first, otherwise it's really frustrating when everyone's got laggy internet and all of that. But are there things that small businesses, in the way that they work, that big businesses can be learning from as well?
Shall I keep going?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, again, going back to that question of supervision and teams, you know, there's always a nice thing in smaller businesses where you do actually know everybody's name, you know who they are, you know their personal backgrounds. You've got that level of intimacy that can be very cohesive and gives you a head start on a big lumbering company, potentially, where a manager may nominally be having to, you know, have hundreds of reports. You know, it's always a nonsense actually when teams get that big and managers are supposed to know everybody. It's not possible. So that's certainly an advantage. Of course, again, the flip side of that is what if that becomes claustrophobic and oppressive? What if you're the kind of person who wants to kind of get on with the work and not have too much intrusion? You know, we've got a sort of extrovert introvert tension there too. So you handle with care, but of course a team where you really know each other, potentially that's a big plus, because it saves a lot of time. You don't have to discuss very much. You know where each other's coming from. A lot of it's unspoken, you know, tacit.
And there's that sense of agility and ability to move forward as well, isn't there? So just a reminder to everyone who's listening, if you have any questions for Stefan and Geoff, please stick them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll come on to those later. I'm sure there's been lots of things that they've said already that is sparking, you know, brain cells. So just to come back to what Geoff said earlier, Geoff, you talked about compassion as the fourth point in leadership, and especially leadership at this time. And you've obviously been focused over the last 4 years on breaking the stigma around mental health in the workplace. So what would your advice be to kind of foster that compassion for leadership, and also just to be sensitive and aware to those issues around mental health during this time?
Yeah, look, I mean, in fact, I've been doing this, you know, I've been an activist and a campaigner around this work for 8 years now. I started it in Unilever in 2012, where we began to look at ways in which we would break the stigma of mental ill health. And then I left Unilever in 2014 to go and take those learnings around the world. And I think, you know, Shama, I think it's about, and I mentioned this the other day, you know, it's about how do we create more human workplaces. You know, I mean, if you think about workplaces today, in many ways, employees are just seen to be a unit of production. And when it comes to the development of that employee, we tend to have conversations which are around, have they got the right skills to do the job? Have they got the right behaviors? And have they got the right experience? And that's about it. What I would like us to see more of, to fuel this sense of compassion in workplaces, is I'd also like us to be having a conversation with employees about their health, about their well-being. You know, because when you are healthy, you are energized. When you are energized, you can perform. So why would you not want to have a conversation with an employee or a team around what do we do to enhance our health so that we've got the energy to be able to perform? And imagine if we could begin to have those sorts of conversations where people can talk about, you know, how they're doing physically, how they're doing emotionally, how they're doing mentally, how they're feeling, whether there's a sense of purpose in the team. I mean, we now begin to have a truly human conversation with somebody, you know, and I know some people are saying, yeah, but health is a very personal thing and we shouldn't be bringing that into the workplace. Well, I'm sorry, if people aren't healthy in workplaces, we've seen what's happened with COVID-19. you know, and so health is a critical driver of performance. And I think we need to build that more into the kind of ethos and the thinking around what people need to perform well. And I want this to be a caring, compassionate development conversation. I don't want to fire people because they're not healthy, but I want to give them the resources to enhance their health, to ensure that the workplace, in terms of the systems and the processes and the environment we create, is conducive to health. And I think if we start seeing, if we build health in, we then are forced to start having these more human conversations, which I think lead to a more compassionate workplace.
And I think one of the things that has a whole load of myths around it is productivity, and the idea that if you spend more time working, you get more output, isn't it? And I think there's been a lot of articles recently where people, writers have been saying, actually, we should be looking at output rather than input, and taking that time to, you know, exercise and take time away from your work if you're not getting anywhere with it, and then come back to it and you'll feel more productive afterwards. I mean, as a company, we've been doing weekly workouts on a Wednesday, and that's been driving afternoon productivity after we've done that. So I think there's definitely something to be said for taking that time out to then come back and be more productive. And then thinking about those creative spaces as well, where people in the workplace, when they were together, they used to be able to collaborate really easily and effectively. What would your advice be, Stefan, in creating and facilitating those creative spaces online in a virtual setting?
Well, I think we're all having to learn how to do that better, and we can't presume too much. We're all kind of beginners, more or less, and people who are used to physical proximity, body language, the non-verbal cues, just the demeanor of people, and that's absolutely part of all-round health that Geoff was alluding to. We know when people are quiet, and also we should acknowledge as well, at a moment like this, you know, our moods are going to change. You know, this is a really weird moment, and some people call it the corona coaster, don't they? The sort of ups and downs emotionally of what we're going through, and you can't really predict, you know, how you're going to feel when you wake up and start another day at the moment, because it's so you know, such a confusing time. So I think you've got to acknowledge that and create a safe and calm space online, since that's what we're doing, where people can be honest, and then people can start doing their best work. They can be creative, because I think you've got to draw on all that you've got if you're going to be creative. So I really like what Geoff was saying about all-round health, the whole person. I think that's absolutely vital. And even if that weren't the right thing to do, which it is, you know, morally, it's also the right thing to do practically, as you were saying, because especially in this knowledge work territory that most people watching this, I think, are probably in, you know, how many full-on hours of productivity have you actually got in you a day? Not 12, not 10, probably, in terms of high quality outputs and outcomes. So again, you've got to be fit and ready to give of your best each day, but no more, because no one can do more than they can do.
I think that's really important to say. So thank you for sharing that, Stefan. Just a reminder to everyone listening, if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box, and we'll come over to those in a little while. Geoff, coming back to you, Stefan's just talked about, you don't know, for lots of people, their mood changes day to day, and you've already talked a bit about how leaders can be sensitive to this, but what would your advice be to business leaders who are managing lots of people, and they are trying to be sensitive to these issues over video, where it's harder to see how someone is?
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I would say this is, you know, leaders in all workplaces today. You know, yes, I know there's a business focus here, but you know, a fire brigade is a workplace, a kindergarten is a workplace, a university is a workplace. And so how do we create these more compassionate and more human workplaces? And I think there are a couple of things, Sharma. I think the first one is I think leaders at all levels should really be in tune and understand some of the symptoms that are related to poor mental health and the common forms of poor mental health. That is things like depression and anxiety. I mean, how many of us were ever educated around the symptoms of anxiety, the symptoms of depression? And so I think leaders today they've got to go and get that understanding. They've got to get that knowledge. I think the second thing then as a leader is, once you're aware of some of those symptoms, is to be alert to those, And the best way in which you can be alert to those is, I often say, we all know one another's normal behavior. We know how people behave normally. And we all kind of, my behavior hasn't changed just because I'm on Zoom, we all kind of know one another's normal behavior. And if, as a leader, you've just noticed in some of the Zoom interactions and the things that you've had that, some of your people's normal behavior is just not normal. So, for example, they're not as quick on returning emails or calls like they normally are, or they've become a little bit more withdrawn in some of your group communications on Zoom. But you've just noticed a shift, that subtle shift in their normal behavior. And that's been persistent for sort of 2 or 3 weeks. Then I think it's actually worth that conversation with that person to see, how are you doing? And by the way, and maybe the leader needs to start with sharing some of their own vulnerability, because I'm not going to be vulnerable with you if, number one, I'm not sure whether you've got a compassionate relationship to mental ill health. But if you can share, as a leader, a bit of your own vulnerability, then in that conversation, I might feel it's safe for me to be a bit vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So I think the bottom line is, get in touch with and understand what are the symptoms. And then secondly, just look out for those shifts in normal behavior, which might catalyze a compassionate conversation.
Mm. Yes, could I just add, because I think Geoff's point about vulnerability is really important. Just because I've got quite a nice example recently. I was talking to a CEO who shared with his top team that he said he was still in mourning for this beautiful 5-year strategy that he'd drawn up with them all together, and that he just was so excited about executing with them. And he just told the group, look, I'm really upset about this and I'm still going through it, and it's taking me some time to get through it. So just for everyone to know, and I thought that was very powerful, lets everyone know it's all right to acknowledge these things and talk about them and recognize the reality of where you are.
Totally. Thank you both for sharing that. I think those were very, very important things for people to be thinking about at this time. So we've got questions coming in. Thank you to everyone who sent those in already. And I encourage everyone to keep thinking of questions and sending them in, because it would be great to hear Geoff and Stefan's thoughts. So our first question here is from Peter Templey, and he says, we are focusing rightly on the people working remotely. What can leadership do to help those who are on furlough so they can be well and prepared for their return?
Okay, I'll dive in. Well, clearly the point about communicating as much as you can about what you know, which may be limited, is part of it. Not too much. We don't want 20 emails a day with nothing changing in them. But as much as you can say. Now, keeping on top of what the government is announcing factually, and I think the Chancellor said yesterday he wants to avoid a cliff edge moment, as he called it, when the furlough comes to an end. I mean, these were amazing figures, by the way, over 6 million people on furlough in the UK. I mean, it's a quarter of the paid workforce at the moment, employed workforce. It's an extraordinary moment. So you can't minimize that, and yet all you can do is be as candid as you can be and timely with comments, and just saying we're going to get through it. We can't predict what's going to happen. But that was a slightly encouraging statement from the Chancellor yesterday. I think that if things are going to come to an end, they're not going to come to an end suddenly. They're going to be phased in. That is at least slightly less scary than it might be.
Thank you for that. Geoff, did you have any thoughts?
No, I think Stefan's covered that. It's a little bit like, think about somebody who's on long-term sick absence as a leader. I mean, how do you just maintain some form of communication, show some kind of support to those people, try and reduce some of the instability and the uncertainty as best you can. And as Stefan said, keep them up to date as to where the business is at in supporting what the government is going to be doing. So I think Thank you, Stefan. I think you answered that very well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. We have a comment here from Abigail Barnes. She says, no question, just to thank you for opening up this great conversation. Well-being and communication are essential for motivation. So thank you for that, Abigail. A question here from Nicholas. He asks, in the new compassionate and virtual workplace, how do we best manage the friction and competitiveness of promotion or advancement?
Yeah, Nick or Nicholas, first of all, I don't want to assume that we are going to go back into a compassionate and as you described it, kind of workplace. I mean, I think the jury's out. I think we're going to be at a crossroads. And I think that, I think at the end of the day, what do we promote people on? And for so long, we've just promoted people on their ability to, and of course you've got to deliver the output, all right, and you've got to perform, but I think it's also how you go about performing. And I think more and more we've got to be focusing and making tougher and more braver decisions on the promotion of people, not merely based on what they've delivered, but also on how they've gone about delivering that. And I think in that how piece, are these leaders, are they creating people who's up for promotion? Did they create an environment where people's lives were enhanced by working for that person? Or was their life diminished and in fact had to go off sick because they were depressed or anxious because of the bullying nature and the narcissistic views of that particular leader? And so, how do we begin to evaluate that kind of the how piece? And, in Unilever, we had a bit of that. It was around the values and how people behaved together with what they delivered. But I would like us to build in this whole piece around, have they enhanced the well-being and the health of their people as a key determinant to a promotion opportunity. So it's about the what and the how, and I hope we focus more on the how going forward.
Thank you, Geoff.
So it's a nice, it's a subtle and thoughtful question actually, because as we kind of inch back to something a bit more like normal or a new normal, of course, human behavior is going to carry on. And so ambition, which is a normal and healthy thing, and competitiveness, likewise, are going to manifest themselves. And I suppose the test in a way is that if we are being more transparent and candid about the world we're in, maybe the behavior is going to be even more stark, as it were, online, if we're trying to share things in real time with each other as openly as possible. So maybe if you are ambitious and competitive, it's also very important to make sure you're absolutely straightforward in your behavior. It's not a good time for sort of sneakiness and nasty politics and all that. So I think that, of course, people will be ambitious and competitive, and that's good, but let's hope we go about things in the right way, not a underhand way.
Totally. We have another question here about working with new clients. So this person's asked, how would you suggest working most effectively with new clients electronically now versus face-to-face? In the past, we've got to know one another, walking from reception room to meeting room or over a coffee, and now we can't do that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's an experiment that we're living through. Can we accelerate these things, and can online and virtual kind of replace, substitute analog, or flesh time or offline or whatever you want to call it? And I think we can't know for sure. We probably better not presume too much about apparently intimate conversations online, even though, of course, as normal human beings, we want to try and engage with people properly. I think that recognizing where we are, that it is a bit unreal somehow, and yet we've got to carry on. If you can keep both those thoughts in your head at the same time and press on, there's no reason why you can't establish quite good relationships with new clients. Indeed, if you're solving problems together, that's going to be a very powerful start to a relationship with a new client, because you're both getting something out of it and you're proving your worth to each other, as it were. But equally, we just got to guard against, I mean, maybe I'm just a 20th century guy, an analog guy, but, you know, we've got to guard against presuming that what we're doing now can really replace, in the end, being in a room with someone and spending time with them and allowing silences. You know, that's the other thing we don't do perhaps online. Are you allowed to just sit silently and think in a way that you might do in a meeting with someone? You might just let something rest for a minute or two. Online, maybe we don't do that.
There's a fear of awkward silences, isn't there?
I mean, I would just add a little to that, and you know, everybody's different, and I really respect those people out there that are trying to keep their personal lives still very separate to work. But you know, in most of the interactions I've been having online, you know, I see people's bookcase. I can see Stefan's bookcase behind him. I mean, people have come into my home like they would never have been allowed to kind of come into my home, or not allowed, but I wouldn't have expected them to be coming into my home. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I did a session for Novartis last week, and just before the session, you know, I had 5 minutes with the CEO, and on the back of his study, I'm an ardent supporter of Arsenal Football Club, and on the back of on the wall in his study was a big poster around Liverpool Football Club. And I kind of said to him, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do this talk now. I mean, when I see that that Liverpool poster, you can go and find somebody else. I mean, we developed a rapport and a relationship that I wouldn't have developed with him had I had 5 minutes before the talk in his office here in the UK. And so I think there is opportunity as we open up and we bring this more human-centered approach to the way in which we lead and we run organizations, you know, and as we let some of this into through Zoom, and that we let some of our personal stuff into the conversation, I think we can still build those relationships that you have, maybe, you know, the conversation you have walking to the water cooler or the coffee machine.
Yeah, thank you for that. We just had a comment on what you've been saying, Geoff, from Louise. You are so right. We are taking in the environments, animals and children of our colleagues. So I think that's something everyone's experiencing at the moment. We've got time for a couple more questions, I think. We have a question here about, which I think we've touched on a little bit when we were talking about motivation earlier. This question says, with return to normal not likely to happen anytime soon, how do you instill a vision and hope in your team when the future is so unclear? So Geoff, I think if you have any thoughts on this.
Wow, I mean, that's difficult. I mean, it's really difficult to do that. I think, coming back to Stefan's point, I think it's about being authentic and honest. You know, if I look at the leaders out there at a national level who I think have really handled this well, I think Angela Merkel has done an amazing job. And you know why? Because she was just authentic and she was just honest with people. And you know, I think that there is, I mean, of course you don't want to panic people. And of course you want to try and reduce the uncertainty and provide that glimmer of hope. But I think at the end of the day, it's about that, you know, that sense of authenticity and honesty. And that then gives people time to actually deal with that and to think about what that's going to mean for them. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but I would just come back to authenticity and honesty in the way in which we're dealing with people, both now and what the future might hold.
Yes, I agree with all that. And I'll just perhaps add, it's that combination of realism and optimism. I mean, it's got to be realism, because there's no, you know, you're lying if you're not being realistic and you're not helping anyone. And yet somehow we have to try and be glass half full, I think, because, you know, who wants to work for a pessimist? If you are a leader, you've got to be pointing the way towards something, even if, in all honesty, you can't really be sure what it is. But I think that's one of the duties of leadership right now, is to at least try and map out some sort of path to the future that feels real and offers some hope to people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've just got time for one more question here to end on a positive note. This is a question around what positives should we take from the COVID-19 working environment, but indeed actually the problem as a whole, the crisis as a whole. What is the silver lining there?
Why don't you go, Stefan?
Okay. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, look, people have proven themselves to be very adaptable. That's really great. And as Geoff also said, not just in business, you know, in schools and colleges and so on, teachers putting work online and students, school children, my own children adapting to learn online in new ways very fast. That's very encouraging. The amazing scientific research that we know is going on all around the world. That's encouraging too. And on a practical point, to get back to the topic, proof that flexibility and flexible working really can work, I think, and I think that's been that will be a kind of epiphany, awakening for quite a lot of CEOs who perhaps have been skeptical deep down about what happens when people go home, if they leave the office at 2 and say, oh, I'll finish this off at home, and so on. I think we've shown that we really can trust people to complete work properly, fully, well at home, and that's obviously throwing up big questions about the future, about commuting, about office space, and how we work together. And that's to emerge. But yeah, there's human beings have shown themselves to be very intelligent and adaptable and conscientious, and that's all good.
Yeah, and I you know, I know, Sharma, yesterday I was really keen for us to maybe end on a positive note. You know, notwithstanding that, I think that, you know, one has to take into account that many people are being significantly affected in not a good way as a result of COVID-19, whether that's loss of jobs, whether that's loss of loved ones and life, etc., etc. And so let's recognize that. But I think in terms of a silver lining for me, maybe I can sum it up by saying that hopefully more workplaces, and in its broader sense, leaders and individuals will just do things because it's the right thing to do. And I think we've seen a lot of that right now. You know, we've seen organizations and workplaces just doing the right thing. You know, the manufacturers of sandals, you know, those Croc things, and just giving them out to NHS workers for free. I mean, there's no business case for that, but they just felt that that was the right thing to be doing right now. And I would hope that leaders across all workplaces, the silver lining for me is, instead of answering the question, what could we do? We would ask the question, what should we do going forward? You know, we all know we could evade tax because there are ways in which we can do that. But should we do that? No, we shouldn't. And so I hope the silver lining is one of organizations that are doing the right thing, are seeing the benefit of that, and long may that continue.
Thank you, Geoff and Stefan, so much. Sadly, we don't have time for any more questions, but I'm sure anyone listening, if you would like to continue the conversation with Stefan and Geoff, they are very open to chatting further over LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you both so much for your time this morning and your insight. It's been wonderful to hear from you both. Emma, I'll hand back to you now.
And just to echo, Shama, what you've just said, Stefan and Geoff, I actually wrote quite a lot of notes. I had a sort of 11-point plan off the back of that. So on a personal standpoint, thank you. I found that invaluable. I think for any of us who are trying to really help and support both communities and family members and businesses, and indeed our own organisation, it was really, really helpful. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll look forward to trying to implement some of those things as of 9 o'clock today. So thank you. Really, I think purpose comes out very, very clearly in that. And I think that many, many people, both from an individual standpoint and indeed from a business standpoint and health and so on, there's so many aspects to that. And I can't agree more in terms of wellness. I've actually been able to go for runs 3 times a week in a way that I haven't been for at least a year. So I think that's really important, along with so many other things that you said today. So thank you. If, as listeners, you've enjoyed today, please do join us at Chief Disruptor Live Virtual. We're going to be doing that on the 2nd of June. The most important thing for us as a community is to learn, to listen, to connect, and to bring members together, both new and existing, to really help and support them. For us, Pivot, Don't Panic was really the foundations to then bring us all together on the 2nd of June at Pivot to a New Future. So we will be packing the day full of masterclasses, keynotes, one-to-one sessions and so on to really help you with that actionable insight you need for your organization, those strategies that we all need more than ever. The focus for us is to look at various different themes, from game plan boost to looking at critical workflows to finding the digital optimum to the innovation mindset, the intuitive brand and data journey. Got a number of fantastic experts who are going to be joining us, as well as many partners who are there to support and to listen and understand as we go through this new normal that everyone keeps talking about.